Welcome to another edition of Friends and Enemies. And wow, it's a controversial show because we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Epstein and his underage girls honey trap situation where people are saying he was Mossad or they were saying he was KGB. And among those things, we're going to sort this out. And then the role that anti-Semitism plays, or whether it is anti-Semitism to prefer to say Mossad is the bigger threat to the United States than the KGB, the tiny Mossad. Guess that gives away what I think. Alex, I have an opening question for you. If somebody tells you that Washington, D.C. is controlled by the Zionists or the Jews, are they anti-Semites?
Okay, so some people, they don't really separate these things, right? They just pretend that they can separate these things. They will say the Jews run everything, but then they will also say, but I'm not an anti-Semite, right? Some people are just lying about it, and where there's smoke, there's usually fire.
They seem to say they're not anti-Semites.
Yeah, and so this is why it's been so easy for so many professional intelligence agencies to infiltrate the extreme right wing. I mean, there's so many aspects and chapters of history, the post-war German history, or Britain, or America, or other places too. So it's where there's smoke, there's usually fire. It's easy to notice people when they say Israel is horrible, or they say the Jews run this, or the Jews are behind everything. And then they claim they're not anti-Semitic, but then, of course, if you look, usually you find hardcore classic anti-Semitism. But that's not always the case. Some people actually believe, or have convinced themselves, that they can separate these two things. They can criticize the Jewish lobby, or Israel, or talk about the Epstein case, or whatever, or banking. They think they can talk about this in this specific way, this populist way, this copy and paste way. They think they can talk about this, but they believe they're not anti-Semitic. They're not classic anti-Semites. So what I would do if somebody claims to distinguish between these things, what I would do is just ask a very simple question. I would ask this person, why do you think Jewish people were so successful, more successful in gathering power than everybody else? Why don't the Muslims rule the world? There's between 1 and 2 billion Muslims in the world. They have 1,500 plus years of imperial history. Why don't the Muslims rule everything? Washington, London, and whatnot. Why wasn't it the Muslims? Or you got all this history about European empires. They were so hardcore, they were so professional, so successful, just developing the methods. Why don't the Europeans run it all? Or European heritage people, why don't they run it all? Or Latinos, there's a lot of Latinos, why don't they rule it all? Or Africans, why do you think out of all these groups that it was the Jews? Well, it sounds so stupid, the Jews, But for the sake of argument, why do you think the Jews came out on top and not somebody else? And if you ask that open but kind of direct question, the person you're talking to has a limited set of answers, a limited set of options. So the diplomatic, self-protective answer would be, well, it was just coincidence. But then you can follow up and say, groups don't become super dominant out of coincidence. Sometimes luck is involved, but if you look at the history of empires and different groups that dominated vast amounts of land or seas, it wasn't coincidence. It was professionality. It was intentionality. It was superior skill sets. So I'm not really convinced of, a coincidence as an answer. So then you can try to probe other answers. Why? Why the Jews? Why not somebody else? And so what's left is a very limited set of answers that then would fulfill the definition of classic anti-Semitism. Because we've heard it all before, from the Nazis, from the Muslims, from all kinds of groups. The same answers. It's the inherent evil answer. This was very popular for a while, even before most people heard about genetics. It was already believed that a specific set of innate traits, a specific set of attributes was making the Jews so successful and out-dominate everybody. So they're inherently evil or more successful in gathering power. So that's one thing, one common answer. Another answer is a bit different, and it goes like this. Well, other empires, they had sort of moral limitations. There were moral boundaries that they wouldn't cross, or wouldn't cross as much as the Jews, which is also complete nonsense, right? Because the imperial game, as it was played for roughly 10,000 years, it was about winning. Doesn't matter how you win, but just winning, okay? And so this answer also is a cop-out. If somebody says, well, everybody else wouldn't cross these boundaries. I mean, what boundaries were not crossed by the Muslim Caliphate or some other empires? Everybody was trying everything to win. And it's just a cop-out to say, well, this empire was, the other empires were Christian, they wouldn't do certain things. Or, the Muslims, they wouldn't cross these boundaries, but only the Jews did.
Well,
there's only a limited set of answers and 1-2 follow-up questions, and you basically can tell that it's classic anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Classic anti-Semitism. I think of Hitler. And the thing is, I recently had somebody tell me that the Zionists or the Jews or the Knesset or whatever controls Israel. Controls Washington D.C.
Everything.
And of course, this is exactly what Hitler believed. Hitler believed the Jews controlled Washington. He believed they controlled or had a major influence in Great Britain. It wasn't true. It objectively was not true, because the Allies didn't move heaven and earth to save the Jews in the Holocaust. They were interested in defeating Hitler, but they didn't bomb the trains or do anything to put their forces at risk to try to save Jewish lives. They didn't. In fact, Roosevelt at Yalta made a off-color joke about the Jews. You want ours? We can send ours to you, because Roosevelt expressed a kind of annoyance about the Jews, and the idea, upper crust British society and American society, there was anti-Semitism in it in the 1930s and 40s. That kind of became hidden when everyone was embarrassed at what had happened to the Jews in Germany during the war, in Europe during the war. People were quite embarrassed by their anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism, then Hitler gave it a bad name, because Hitler, after all, had arranged this Holocaust. You had Heydrich of the Reich Security Office, having the Wannsee Conference, how we're going to move the Jews to ghettos and to transit camps and move them further east. Resettlement, which was another name for putting them in forced labor camps, and those who couldn't labor, exterminating them, right? And you had these extermination camps like Treblinka, right? The transit camps, a lot of extermination happened in those. And all those details of how this thing worked, it's very complicated. It was a machine killing. It was a bureaucratic machine killing. The world just, didn't want to, they were embarrassed. Anti-Semitism became an embarrassment. But what's really, for an American, to read all these Nazi memoirs, all these Nazi opinions, Joseph Goebbels, that America is somehow controlled by the Jews, it's insulting. It's not only wrong, it's
Yeah.
insulting to say that Washington's controlled by the Jews. Well, Washington is an embarrassment for us Americans because we know they've taken bribes from South Korean businessmen, Japanese businessmen, Arab oil guys. You think they're not going to suffer from blackmail or bribery from Israel? Little tiny Israel. The difference between these countries is Israel is doing it to survive because everybody
Yeah.
around them wants to exterminate them still, right?
Yeah, and so
And
this is
and
kind of like,
and
and you had this example when we did this episode on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and there was this operation that just happened with the exploding pagers and exploding like radio
yes, very
devices.
ruthless, very bloody.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so there's just you can discuss these things that Israel does or things that Israel has prepared, some very scary things, weapons of mass destruction, this, that, and the other. But you can discuss these things in a very responsible way by explaining how it's about survival and how there is a lot of pressure and it's really tough work to make a country or a little country like Israel survive. It's
Well,
not
when you
just
talk
about
Gaza,
complaining
for
things.
example, look,
You can't just
I'm not
complain
gonna,
about these things. You have to put yourself mentally in that position. What if I had the
right,
responsibility for Israel? What would I do
right.
for Israel?
What would you do? Yeah, with when you look at Gaza, okay, they kill thousands of civilians by bombing out Hamas, and people say that's inexcusable, that's inhumane. Of course, it's against the rules of war and whatnot. But you psychologically, these people were being exterminated by Hitler and the Nazis, and they faced the same thing with the Arab Nazis, the Arab National Socialists, and the Islamists. They faced over the history of Israel the same thing. So they have a siege mentality, and if they have to kill their enemy, if they have to knock out a few Hamas terrorists, they have to wipe out a city block and kill 100 people along with a couple of these terrorists. They will take that choice because they are fighting for the survival of their country. That is tragic, and maybe, of course, it's morally wrong by normal standards, but given the circumstances of them, it's understandable in a
Yeah,
way.
nobody can magically change the fundamental reality of war. There's no magic button you can push by saying,
No,
let's do
there's
this
not.
activism and this problem will disappear. It doesn't disappear. And by the way, wasn't it the case that the anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism pushed to the extreme by the Nazis, it essentially ruined the German foreign espionage and the domestic counterintelligence. Now, we've explained this before, and I recommend people check out previous episodes that we've done. If the focus was on hunting Jewish people and not really chasing actual spies that matters, Soviet spies like Bormann, they celebrated Bormann, gave him the biggest, one of the biggest posts in the entire empire. Not finding Bormann, not finding these other sources that were essential for the Soviets, and this is how they won the war over there against us. Not finding these spies, not finding the aristocrats who were working against the Nazis, working against Germany, and ultimately worked for Britain, not finding those spies.
Like Admiral Canaris.
Yeah, and so and not finding other spies, but instead focusing on finding the last guy within the realm, the empire, the expanding empire, finding the last guy or the last woman and the last child who may have had a Jewish grandfather. That was the counterintelligence work. That was the obsession, because according to anti-Semitism, as I explained in the beginning, nobody is more of a danger than a Jew, they thought, and so hunting every Jew was the priority. Because if you had even one Jewish grandfather and nothing else was Jewish about you, not your religion, not your the rest of your ethnicity, but if you had like this one Jewish grandfather, you were a priority. You were hunted down and exterminated. So this is how you ruin your counterintelligence And this is how you ultimately lose the war. And on the other hand, this anti-Semitism ruined foreign espionage. I mean, the Nazis were not that good at foreign espionage to begin with. They made some really incompetent people or gave incompetent people a lot of responsibility. But also, the Nazi government, they fell for a lot of deception, right? Deception by the British, this famous deception operation run by Winston Churchill and the King, the Lou Kilzer book, Churchill's Deception, a very sophisticated program to pretend that high-powered circles in Britain were friendly with the Nazis and wanted to make a pact with the Nazis, right? And so this is
you notice, but I should make an interjection. You notice how anti-Semitism, though it was a Nazi thing, really served the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Both in making the right in Germany toxic, making Germany toxic, making it so that they could align with the liberals in the West, liberal democracies in the West. But it is a stalking horse that whenever you have an operation or a conspiracy that is communist, you can get people to say it's Jewish.
Every single time.
And they're not looking at Moscow anymore. They're going to look at Mossad, or they're going to look at the Jews or the Zionists, whatever. They're not going to be looking at Russia or China. And that is really a huge thing, to have a lightning rod. The Jews are the lightning rod. So the KGB runs all kinds of operations. And what's one of their favorite tactics? And I've seen it in things I've investigated personally, that people say, oh, so-and-so said he was a Mossad agent. Turns out he was KGB, right? Blackmailing a U.S. congressman.
Yeah. And also,
right?
What's the key aspect? What is the key aspect of intelligence work? It is it's the process assessing information and assessing situations and assessing information to figure out if it's trustworthy. If this thing that's going on over there, is this real? Can we trust this process or event? Can we trust this person? Can we trust this source that we just acquired? Can we trust this person, so we should recruit him, or is he untrustworthy and we should not recruit him? So this is kind of like the absolute fundamental essentials of intelligence work, and anti-Semitism will absolutely ruin it for you any day of the week. So it goes both ways, trust and distrust. You see, if you're not anti-Semitic, if you don't buy into that anti-Semitic cult, this we can explain everything, cult. If you're not buying into that, certain people or cult members, they will absolutely not trust you. They will fundamentally distrust you.
I have been accused of being a Zionist agent. I've had my picture
even when it's bad for them, even if it's to their disadvantage, even if they hurt themselves by distrusting you or distrusting me.
Yeah.
They will hurt themselves. On the other side, goes in the other direction too. They will trust someone who says or claims to belong to the cult. He may belong to the cult. He may not really belong to the cult, but as long as he says these things, immediate trust. This is why it worked for the Nazis. This is why Martin Bormann became such a high-powered guy in the Nazi empire, even though he betrayed everything to the Russians and to the Soviets, because Bormann was in it early. And he was an early anti-Semitic, violent activist, and he knew everybody, so this is why he got the top job. And same with some of my ancestors. They got in early. And they were so anti-Semitic that they, in between their political career, with the NSDAP, they worked for in various capacities, worked for Der Stürmer, the publication, even though they were absolutely unqualified to judge these questions of who actually runs what, because they had no suitable background. So again, oh, you're an anti-Semite? Oh, I'm going to trust you. I respect you. I trust you. You're not an anti-Semite? I distrust you. is this breaks the fundamentals of intelligence, and this will make you lose everything, even a war, or especially a war. You shred everything. Your counterintelligence, your foreign espionage, everything is garbage. Everything
because
is
your
junk.
paranoia is diffused over the Jews as being as dangerous or more dangerous than your real enemies.
Exactly.
Right?
And so I can cover cases of bad people, really bad people, that look like me, or like most people here in the south of Germany. I can cover current events about really bad individuals or groups, or I can cover past events about specific groups that look like me, look like everybody here. I don't have a problem with that, right? So,
by the way, in my introduction, I forgot to say you are Alex Benesch in Germany, and I am Jeffrey Nyquist in the United States, and we've been having this conversation for a
yeah,
while. And
but
I would ask you this one question when now to introduce the topic of Epstein. You have this guy; he's Jewish. And this is a great thing for the KGB to run operations with Jewish people. This is why the oligarchs are Jewish. You pick the Jewish people because you got the stalking horse of the Jews. Now, am I right or not to say that you had made a comment to me before we started broadcasting that this is a very sloppy operation? A lot of people knew about what was going on. He's at the center of everything. These girls are coming in and out. There's accusations. He eventually got convicted of, child prostitution, although he didn't get the 5 years you're minimally supposed to get. He got practically a nothing, and he's back out there again, meeting with Vladimir Putin, by the way. So, but the thing I want to ask you about is you'd made this observation before we started about him being out in the open. And the thing that's great is why would the KGB do this? Because the KGB had it all set up. He had relations with Israeli politicians. The former head of the Mossad was going in and out of his New York house. They could easily pawn it off as an Israeli operation. And so they had cover, and no one would ever be able to untangle it. Isn't that why they felt safe for this guy to operate so openly?
yeah, and also if let's say a fully Jewish person, we're talking just total ethnicity, total ethnic attributes, fully Jewish, and a believer, practicing religious believer. If an actual full 100% Jew becomes a communist, and becomes if a Jew becomes a communist or a communist spy, that's a massive problem, and I will cover that any day of the week. Or if the Rosenbergs, now we're talking, Jewish people in the West. Sometimes they look like half Jewish, half European heritage. Some people, they look even more European than Middle Eastern. Some people that are that are labeled as Jewish, they're not even practicing Jewish religion, or they look mostly German, right? So you can get all kinds of different Jewish people. But if any one of them, like the Rosenbergs, become full-on traitors, or Klaus Fuchs, the atomic spy,
yeah,
who had communist, what was it, sister or whatever, and all the Brits couldn't figure it out that he was a security risk, and then the Brits with their tube alloys project to develop highly enriched uranium and plutonium and make a nuclear bomb. This whole project was moved to the United States, became the Manhattan Project, and the Brits said, "Oh, we got these great scientists here. We're going to ship them to the U.S. And don't worry, dear FBI, we vetted them. They're totally safe. Here is Klaus Fuchs, who has a German Jewish background, and he's a totally awesome nuclear scientist. Just work with him in the Manhattan Project, and then he just betrays everything to the Soviet Union." I will cover these cases over and over and over again. I have no problem covering a case where a person in it is Jewish, right? Absolutely no problem whatsoever. And all this background, when people talk about the mythology, the Rothschilds taking over the British Empire, which is baloney. I can actually reconstruct the history and the intelligence history of how kings and crowns have recruited some Jewish people for various missions and operations, and it's a complicated thing to judge morally. I mean, operationally, I get it why it was done. Straightforward, yeah, I get it. But morally, it's hard to judge, because if you're a Jewish person and you live in a ghetto like the original Rothschild, like Maya Amschel Rothschild, living in the ghetto, this whole community, and it was lockdown. It was constant curfews, and if fire broke out, yeah, well, that was it then. There was a higher level of danger if you were confined to a Jewish ghetto. If a disease broke out, same thing. If a pogrom happened, you're screwed. And then, with all this stuff happening over and over again, then comes an aristocrat or some intelligence person working for the aristocracy in that particular neck of Germany, neck of the woods. The aristocrat comes, or the intelligence officer comes and says, okay, you're a Jewish guy living in the ghetto, you're smart, you could work for us. We can test you, we can vet you, you can spy on your fellow Jewish ghetto dwellers. You can spy on them, and we will check out if this information is actually true that you give us. And then you can start doing some little missions for us, and then we see if you're trustworthy. And if you're trustworthy, we'll give you more missions. And if you refuse this offer, because we made some effort actually pre-selecting you, and we don't want to waste our precious efforts here. If you refuse this offer, this could have bad consequences for your entire community. So, what do you say? And usually the Jewish person would say, yeah, okay, I will work for you. And sometimes it was kind of like a walk-in, a Jewish person would figure out how this game was played, and the Jewish person, like Maya Amschel Rothschild, would actually approach the aristocracy and say, could I work for you? Could I work for the aristocracy? Could I become a trusted associate, or whatever you want to call it? And then it's a vetting process. I think it was a 20-year vetting process for Maya Amschel Rothschild, something in that size dimension. And so, I can reconstruct that, and I can attempt to make some moral observations about this. But yeah, when we get to Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, if people remember what he looked like, remember his face, he would not Jeffrey Epstein, if he wasn't so infamous now, and if he hadn't been so visible in the past, he would not have made any heads turn on a German street. I mean, I'm not saying he looks fully classic German, but he doesn't look different enough for people to notice here. And, we're talking Bavaria. We're talking like the neck of the woods. We're talking like, this is as German as it gets. So he's this guy that's now in the major news, and, influencers talk about him because of a new mountain of documents that was released, emails and other communications relating to Epstein's enterprises. Now, this has reached a dimension that is comparable to the JFK assassination or 9/11, where we have millions and millions of documents now in the public. Some of it was declassified over time. It's too much for a single person to read. You could spend your entire life on all the documents of the JFK assassination. You would not actually understand the JFK assassination just by going through these documents. That's just not how it works. And so now everybody's talking about these new documents, what they call the Epstein files, which is mostly communications over unsecured channels, emails. Scary sounding stuff, but not very conclusive stuff. It's just evidence and
It's suggestive.
yeah.
It's
And so
suggestive.
professionals should then use this material to investigate further and see what is what. What this one guy who was hanging out with Epstein, was he completely legal? Were they just talking about money? Or were they partying with adult women, which is legal? I mean, there's some different prostitution laws in different U.S. states, but when you have like an island, or you have an island in a whole different jurisdiction. I mean, it's just there was partying with adult women, and so he was known as the fun guy, and a lot of people probably just knew him as that fun guy for a while. But then, of course, the rumors and the first conviction, the soft deal he got, then people still stuck with him, even though it was clear what he was doing on the illegal side of things. People still stuck to him, and then came the report in the Miami Herald from Julie K. Brown. She brought down the whole house of cards, which was surprisingly easy to do. And the second, the arrest and indictments, and then his apparent supposed suicide. So there are different stages of his enterprises, and many people probably just knew him as the fun guy, who parties with women. And sometimes people prefer that. We saw that with Donald Trump, who is not a drinker. He's not a drinker, and he was just partying a lot with women. So we have to understand what is what. And from an intelligence point of view, what the heck happened here? Who was running this? For what reasons? And what stands out? And what is pretty common? Okay, so what stands out about Jeffrey Epstein, beyond the crimes themselves, is the architecture of the operation as it appears in indictments and civil filings and later document releases. A sprawling, high visibility, multi-location enterprise that seems to have depended heavily on one man's personal brand, constant social emotion, and a wide orbit of facilitators. Now, this feels like a house of cards for a simple reason. Most professional clandestine organizations, like criminal networks, intelligence services, or hybrids, are designed to avoid exactly this. They compartmentalize, they reduce visibility, they distribute risk, they limit the number of people who can unravel the whole operation. They attempt to make key individuals replaceable. Now, Epstein's world appears to have violated many of those fundamental principles, and yet it persisted until a single female investigative reporter for the Miami Herald named Julie K. Brown tore it down. The fact that she managed to accrue enough material on him with only minimal resources proves that others could have managed to do the same. Spy services, while not being all-knowing and all-powerful, maintain and grow lists of persons of interest. Anybody high enough on that list may be targeted for recruitment, or arrested, or indicted, or sabotaged in his operations. Vice versa, spy services have to hide their own assets and operations from competing or enemy services. So, now we try to reconstruct, we try to sort of reconstruct the intelligence history of Jeffrey Epstein, the spy history of Jeffrey Epstein. And this has multiple players, some a lot stronger than others. Groups involved, services involved, and some are way stronger than others. So let's tell people how somebody pops up on the radar of a spy service. Because some people get paranoid. They think, oh, yeah, I'm so important. I'm a target for, everybody. But how do you actually pop up on the radar of, let's say, the Russian services or the Israeli services or American services? How does that happen? So here's an example. It goes from one person to the other, right? So we know from actual Eastern Bloc spy files that communist spy services were interested in Donald Trump long before he seriously entered the field of politics. Now, standard operating procedures meant that Trump's behaviors and contacts had to be silently mapped. It would not have taken a long time until Jeffrey Epstein appeared on the radar. Even if Epstein's partying with Trump had remained entirely legal, the logical step for the Soviet services would have been to place Epstein on the list of valuable targets. This is how it's done. Simultaneously, Epstein probably appeared on the radars of other services, like the FBI's counterintelligence division, the Israeli Mossad, and others. He even bragged to others about working for or with or alongside the CIA. Maybe that was just a brag. He was a protege for a while of Donald Barr, who had served in the predecessor of the CIA and had published Space Relations, a science fiction novel about a planet ruled by oligarchs who engage in child sex slavery. Take that at face value if you want. Epstein was so comfortable with his high-level Israeli contacts, that a confidential source for the FBI viewed him as a Mossad asset. Recently released files document his desire to cooperate with the highest levels of the Russian regime. So, different services who may have become interested in Jeffrey Epstein. They may have viewed him as a potential source, a potential asset, or a potential problem. Like the FBI. The FBI's counterintelligence division. So you pop up on the radars of services, and that may be we want him radar, or we want to destroy this guy radar, because there's different radars. So now different services were interested in him for whatever reasons. And so now media outlets and influencers can pick and choose bits of information to paint him as a full asset or trained officer of the CIA, Mossad, or FSB, SVR. Yet these services are very careful. These services are very careful about recruiting people and employ various vetting techniques, which minimize risks. Sometimes exceptions are made to buy someone's information as a one-off, use a source on and off, or keep a source in a loose relationship for a while. This can be done through intermediaries, and the source will be repeatedly evaluated in terms of his usefulness and trustworthiness. Doubt will get a relationship terminated. We have many examples of important trained intelligence officers who went off the rails with drinking, gambling debts, and domestic violence, ultimately becoming traitors to save their finances and to protect their egos. Now, any professional service would hesitate with recruiting Epstein with his murky history of financial success, wild partying, and international travel. Epstein was not special or talented enough to just warrant his recruitment outright. Why recruit him and repeatedly use him for very sensitive missions when you can have 10 trustworthy assets instead who do the job quietly? A recruited person, and this is how this can become really complicated, a recruited person is not allowed to sell his services to another spy service except when he is instructed to do so to play a double game, or if he is loaned to another agency. He has to report any attempts by other agencies to recruit him to his handler. If he does not follow these rules and starts to serve multiple masters, or he betrays his master to the benefit of another, he's on very thin ice. His initial service may find out about his betrayal and dump him, have him arrested, or destroy his life. Or the decision is made to feed him disinformation so that he carries it to his new friends. It is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was reckless with all the underage girls he had delivered to him. A single journalist destroyed a single journalist destroyed his enterprise. A single servant of Epstein could have been bought or pressured by someone else to collect evidence and pass it on. Thus, Epstein was a silly risk for any professional service. Now, would you say that's kind of a fair assessment of the fundamentals and how a case can become hideously complicated when you start playing double games and triple games?
Yeah, of course. It is very important to remember when we're talking about triple games and double games that the Russian services are expert at this. They're considered the best in the world. They're the ones that have the double agents. You have at the top of the FBI, counterintelligence, Robert Hansen. You have at the top of the CIA, Aldrich Ames.
Traitors,
you have the top
traitors.
of MI5, Sir Roger Hollis. All these people work for the Russians. They were the heads of Western services. You have the Lamy affair in France, the heads of the DGSE in France, Russian agents. Kilm Philby was being prepared to be the head of MI6 when he was given away. And on it goes. General Walter Bedell Smith, head of the CIA at the beginning of 1953, eased out by Eisenhower because he was suspected by the FBI of being a Soviet agent. Alan Dulles, suspected of being a Soviet agent by his chief of counterintelligence, James Angleton, who revealed this at the end of his life when he was dying of lung cancer. Look, when is the head of a Russian service a Western agent? Yeah. When? In this long history. And we know about Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, being a Soviet agent, working secretly. You know, we can look at the memoirs of the head of AMT6, Walter Schellenberg, SS Foreign Intelligence, when he describes in his memoir how Heinrich Müller tried to recruit him as an agent of Stalin in 1943. So they infiltrate everybody. So if there was a honey trap with Jewish people connected to the Mossad, the Russians would own it. Whether they started it or not, it would be theirs. So why is Jeffrey Epstein making so many trips to Moscow that in one of the emails that has been revealed, the guy says, gee, Jeffrey, you go to Russia a lot. Were your parents, KGB, and they left you the business, the family business? I mean, basically, that's what the email says.
Yeah,
right?
And also, I mean, this is this was a lot of stuff over unsecured channels. I mean, who knows all the stuff that was communicated and done over secure channels? And this was the job of the FBI, to track Epstein, to figure this out. And this was the job of other agencies. I mean, even the Mossad, because there is a danger, there is a massive danger to Israel, posed by the Russians. So, of course, the Mossad, the Mossad could figure out that Epstein was working with the Russians. So then it becomes like the job of the Mossad to track Epstein. This is basic stuff, basic logic, or other intelligence agencies. Somebody else may be interested in this guy and what he's doing, and somebody else may start investigating. And we saw this journalist did it. this single female journalist and her a few police contacts and whatnot, they could do it. So why shouldn't a professional service not be able to figure out what Epstein was? So the documents we can see now is valuable data, but of course it's not the end all be all. And this sort of email stuff can be traced automatically. We saw this with various programs of the NSA. They could put people on what they call it, a selector list, or whatever they call it. And so all the regular communications of this person will then be automatically captured and mapped, and his acquaintances would be mapped. This is an automated process. And if that's not enough, there's more sophisticated NSA programs, and other services do that as well. They can specifically attack somebody's computer systems and accounts and networks to break in, copy the data, and leave new backdoors. This is not just something that the NSA can do. This is something that Julie K. Brown could not do. But all kinds of other professionals could do this. Epstein pops up on the radar. Oh, here's this guy. He's hanging around with Trump, and he's hanging out with all these other guys, and we don't know where his money comes from. Well, this Epstein guy seems kind of interesting in a bad way. Maybe a useful way, but let's just try to break into his systems. Let's try to break into every one of his email systems and steal his passwords and, figure out everything he's doing electronically. And also electronically map his movements, because he's bound to have mobile phones on him and other devices like laptops and the sorts. So different agencies from all over the world had a motive to track Epstein, to figure out what he was. And different services from around the world, they had the means to figure out Epstein and track Epstein. So then what happens? What happens if the French figure something out about Epstein? What happens if the British service finds out something about Epstein? Or the Germans, or American services? What if they find creepy stuff about Epstein? Especially his contacts with the Russians. Well, there's a menu of options what to do with it. Now, if it's within the NATO sphere, plus and Israel in it, and if it's important, these different services will actually talk to each other. Have you noticed this Epstein guy? They have these regular meetings, and it's like a standard conference room, but with no windows. And they talk about different interesting bits, and then they may say, well, have you noticed this Epstein guy? We noticed this Epstein guy. Have you noticed him? We're not going to tell you everything we know about him, and you're not going to tell us everything you know about him, but let's just talk about this guy and what to do with it. And so then it may go up the chain of command. What to do with Epstein, right? And you just mentioned all these high-level traders in intelligence services. In the MI5, MI6, CIA, FBI counterintelligence. So if this topic of what to do with Epstein is clearly a problem, or we could try to recruit him, but it's still dangerous to do so. So spy services talk about him, and this topic gets moved up the chain, and it may actually reach somebody really high up the chain who's a traitor, who works for Russia. I mean, we've had this experience in post-war Germany a lot when we formed our own services, or they were formed for us by the British and the Americans, and then we tried to run them, and we figured out eventually that heads of counterintelligence divisions were spies for Moscow. So this is how safeguards become disregarded, right? So this moves up the chain. The topic of what to do with Epstein moves up the chain of command. Somebody high up who's a traitor says, "Oh, I know what to do with this. I'm in charge. I will take this matter into my hands, But then this traitor will sabotage everything. He will protect somebody like Epstein and move obstacles out of his way, and always have an excuse for not arresting him or not destroying Epstein's life or worse things you could do to Epstein. There's always an excuse. We're working on something, and we need this Epstein guy around for a little bit longer because it's important. We can't tell you because you don't have my clearance. I can't tell you what it is, but we need this guy in play for a little bit longer. Just don't go crazy. I got this handled. And then it goes on and on and on and on. Would you say that's like a possibility here that this is what happened? You're still on mute?
Yeah, that's a possibility. What I would say is, look, if we look at the Franklin cover-up, or we look at the Alexis Dutroux scandal in Belgium, Alexis Dutroux, you know this name, the Belgian Epstein, basically.
Yeah.
And it's really funny. He's the only one that went to jail. There were accusations about a larger network involving people. There's testimony now emerging from Anne Lucas, who wrote the book Quest for Love, who was in this network. She never met Dutroux, but she's claiming she was recruited as a 10-year-old. Her mother kind of sold her. Her book is very interesting, by the way. I'm reading it. Saying that, look, this was because the scandal broke out, she felt obligated to tell her story. She never thought she would. These people, these girls are traumatized when they are sold into this kind of slavery and have owners, so to speak. She says she was forced to sleep with the German chancellor. She doesn't name him. She does give out
many
names.
of them. Weren't many of them.
She does give out some names.
It's a small group.
She gives out some businessmen's names. She gives out some names, surprisingly. And she talks about her initiation. And what's interesting is it's very similar to the Epstein ring, except Epstein is not as clandestine, not as careful. But it's identical just about to the Franklin cover-up in Nebraska, which also had sex parties going back to Washington, D.C. This is the late 80s. And of course, it's John DeCamp's book, The Franklin Cover-Up. John DeCamp was a state senator in Nebraska who defended some of the children,
Wasn't he even a war veteran? He was like a war veteran, I think.
DeCamp was a war veteran. He was a lawyer who, I'm not sure what his background was. He would have been a Korean War veteran then. I'm just going
to look this up real quick. I'm going to let you talk because I remember something.
I read the book, but what's identical to the story related to Dutroux's network that Anne Lucas says is that her initiation at one point, I forget how old she was, 14, maybe 13, she had to kill a baby, a 1-year-old baby girl. She had to torture and kill a baby. And this is exactly what they put these young girls through in Nebraska. And in fact, as I recall, it's been 5 to 6 years. It's been more than that since I read DeCamp's book. But I think it was 2 girls put in like a shed overnight with a baby, and the baby had to be dead by morning, or they were going to kill the girls, right? And you talk about, this is trauma bonding. They involve the girls in an evil that they could never confess, that they will always be ashamed of, that gives the network control over them. This is a horrific thing. And of course, what is special about Anneka Lucas is she's done some podcasts, and when you see her in person describing it, the emotions, the choking up, the horrible feelings, the horror that she has at what she herself did is, I mean, you can't fake it. You just can't fake this.
Well, let's not forget. Let's not forget that there's documented evidence for archaeological evidence actually, for some very hardcore native empires Like, was it the Aztecs? Was it another one of
The
one of them?
Aztecs, yeah, we know the Aztecs
They
were
had this
ritually
thing. They had this.
sacrificing
They
human
had this
beings.
thing where
Yeah.
they would stage in public, with audiences in public. They would stage these mass murder rituals,
Ritual
broad
human
daylight,
sacrifices, yeah.
like crazy stuff you would read about serial killers. They did that in broad daylight as a religious and political ceremony on stage in broad daylight, and then use the skulls and concrete or a concrete mixture to create these skull towers, right? And so, and of course, we Europeans, used to burn people alive, when we were hunting for witches. One of these days, I will actually get to do a reconstruction attempt, a reconstruction attempt of some of these chapters of European history. Maybe it was not all about just intimidation and paranoia, but maybe there was some actual hunting down. Maybe hunting down Satanist networks. Maybe it wasn't all baloney. What was done back then?
Well, you remember Tacitus describes the Emperor Tiberius as a child predator. He had a ravenous appetite for young children, for sexually exploiting young children, according to Tacitus. And he would prowl and he would live in these places. And of course, those who caught on to what he was doing were frightened of him. And the name of this, it wasn't Alex Dutroux, it was Mark Dutroux.
Mark Dutroux case, and
he was, I think he was initially, he had abducted a young lady, 19-year-old, in 1996, and she was basically kidnapped and held captive by him for 80 days before investigators found her and another girl cowering in a cellar behind a false wall. So he was sentenced to 13 years in prison for child rape in 1989, was released after 3 years for good behavior, and he was then held in 1996 on charges of kidnapping and raping 6 children and a young woman, including this lady here, and then in the mid-1990s of murdering 4 of them.
This guy.
But what's it's horrific, and of course, when you've got someone serious like a Nick Lucas saying, "Look, these are elite people. These are very wealthy people. These are important people in politics that are drawn into this." You have to ask the question: why do certain people get promoted? And if these networks are well established, did somebody use this as a system of control, or is someone using this as a system of control? And I would postulate the KGB, because even if these networks existed at some time in the past, the KGB would have found them, hijacked them, and then turned them into their own intelligence operations. Because they made it their business to go into organized crime and drug trafficking.
The KGB. We know the KGB had these so-called sparrow schools, these training camps. So they would find young people, recruit them as assets, and train them. But it was a special kind of training school because they had to be super attractive for the target persons. They had to be trained in all kinds of things to please the target persons, and this was an entire highly organized program. The Sparrow program, and every time we look at these cases, the Omaha, Nebraska Franklin case, or the Mark Dutroux case, or the Casa Pia case in Portugal, it was. Every time we look at these cases, we find connections to political circles, political and also business circles who had significant interactions with Russia, right? This was in Portugal for a long time, the dominant faction or the dominant party in Portugal was the Social Democrats, and one of them even became, I think it was José Barroso even became like one of the biggest people in the European Union. And so there were accusations leveled against party members when this Casa Pia scandal came out. This was one of those kind of the same deal as in Omaha, Nebraska. He had like these facilities for orphaned kids, and there was a whole supply chain, a whole distribution chain, people managing getting specific kids to specific customers who were powerful. And same with the Omaha, Nebraska case. I mean, it reached into high levels of the Republican Party, reached into Washington, and what happened? When Republicans started to when these talks started to happen about the supposed end of the Soviet Union and what would happen afterwards. And then we saw what happened afterwards, the soft deal that the Soviets got and the help that the Soviets got to secure Soviet nuclear weapons, and the money we gave them to secure their own nuclear weapons, and the money we gave them to prop up the Soviet or post-Soviet quasi-economy. And what we allowed the Russians to do in the 90s and the 2000s. So there was a lot of soft deals. And it's always this connection to, you got these scandals. You got these scandals. You got the connection to political circles. And then these political and business circles, they interact with Moscow in a way that benefits Moscow. Now, when you talk, I just looked that up. John DeCamp was an American Republican politician. He served as an infantry officer in the United States Army during the Vietnam War. In 1975, he was central to organizing Operation Baby Lift as a civilian, which evacuated 2,800 orphaned Vietnamese children. So kind of a hardcore guy, been there, done that kind of guy. And when we look at the Dutroux case, I mean, there's even been mainstream media documentaries about this here, even German television, and they talk about all the witnesses that magically died, when it was most convenient to people who wanted this case to just disappear. Was it 20 witnesses that died magically? A number in that dimension it was. And also when these accusations started happening, people came forward and gave statements, and there were names being stated. Aristocrats, business elites, politicians, whole bit. And it was like, again, a pipeline. It was a distribution system. It was stashing kits in various places and then delivering them to whatever customer. A whole infrastructure and a protection system, because Mr. Dutroux was officially, I think he was listed as jobless for a while, and officially he was not supposed to have any money, but he owned several properties. How, right? And even when police started to look into things, some investigations were stopped or outright sabotaged. Or when kids started to disappear, magically he didn't pop up on the radar, even though he had prior convictions, serious convictions. And he was a prime suspect in any major case like this in a country as tiny as Belgium. I mean, Belgium is so tiny, even by European standards. I mean, by American standards, Belgium is that's like your backyard. And if kids start disappearing, there's only a limited list of people of immediate interest that you would go to. But this was a very, very serious case here in Europe. And Europe is, I mean, Belgium. Why would major institutions, major European institutions and EU institutions and even NATO places, and why would that be in Belgium? I mean, it's like the guy that British politician used to say, Belgium is a non-country. You know, this was Nigel Farage in Britain, who's still like in politics, and I think he schmoozed a bit with the Russians. I mean, maybe one of these days I'm gonna delve into that a lot more. But you know, Belgium is like a non-country, so how hard is it to find, you know, super criminal networks in Belgium? Shouldn't be that hard. But this is like the European Union, and magically the European Union, you know, coming from this place, this Belgium, suddenly the European Union started to do the dumbest things when it came to Russia. Oh, another pipeline. We're going to buy more Russian gas. We're going to make Germany, which depends on its industry and, you know, heating, because, you know, it's a cold place. Let's make Germany energy dependent on Russia. Yeah, new pipeline. And new power lines. Let's just have power lines alongside the new pipeline, so we get our electricity from the Russian sphere of influence. And
your power becomes dependent on them.
It got dumber and dumber and dumber. Oh, before I forget this, there was this. Yeah. What was this guy's name? He I mean, a long time ago. He was like the super mega leader of the European Union, and this is when suddenly more and more high-powered people here in Europe started to say the same things. Shouldn't we have a Eurasian Union? This was long before, you know, Crimea and Ukraine. Long time ago. Nobody was paying attention to the Russians, right? And then they said, these European guys, just pretty much shortly after the Dutroux scandal, suddenly these people started to say, shouldn't we have a Eurasian Union? Shouldn't we attach the European Union to the Russian Federation? Shouldn't we break down this artificial border and eliminate, you know, the visa requirements for Russians to come here? And shouldn't we have like a common policy and a common market? You know, from Lisbon, from Lisbon to Vladivostok? I mean, make it make sense, Jeff. These scandals happen, you know, accusations against these people, and then these people say what Moscow wants.
Yeah, because the scandal itself is a kind of pressure, right? It's a kind of pressure. Look, one of your guys is going to jail. You want us to protect you. Maybe you need to do something for us, right? Because we could protect you. We're not blackmailing you. We're protecting you. You know, it's like protection money. The guy comes into your store and says, you don't want to be robbed, do you? Pay me and I'll make sure you don't get robbed, right?
Yeah.
That's an old game. We know about that game. So, it seems to me that the important takeaway on the Jeffrey Epstein thing, you probably saw the headline of the Daily Mail. And two important takeaways on that is that they confirmed from their intelligence sources in the UK that Robert Maxwell was a KGB agent recruited in the Soviet Union in the 1970s when he was working to get Jews out of the Soviet Union. Maxwell was Jewish, of course. And of course, Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, was Jeffrey Epstein's business partner. Robert Maxwell, before his death, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, had been creating Soviet front companies, setting them up, which his daughters and others of his associates controlled later. So what was Epstein's operation? It isn't, and people say Maxwell was Mossad, but the British intelligence is saying, no, he was Russian. And then the other sources of the Daily Mail are saying Epstein had connections to the Israelis, but he was KGB. And he was meeting with Putin personally. Now, if you're an agent of the Mossad, supposedly, but you're meeting with Putin, and your girlfriend is the daughter of a Russian agent, who are you really working for? Because really, you can't have two masters, right? You really can't. One of them you are going to betray, and which is why Maxwell probably died. Because the related story, the rumor is Maxwell was blackmailing Israeli officials.
Yeah.
He was trying to extort them. So if he was a KGB agent, that would make sense. He's trying to flip Israelis to being KGB, and the Israelis decided he's not going to blackmail us. We're going to kill him. And that was the Israeli signal. Because the Israelis, their answer a lot of the times is to kill people. Israelis are really, they're used to doing that. That's their thing, is killing people.
Yeah, but also, I mean, this was like the standard baseline KGB pitch, the Soviet intelligence pitch towards Jewish people, telling them, don't trust the Anglos. They betrayed you so many times, so hard. Don't trust these Europeans. Don't trust these Americans. They didn't really save you. They didn't really save you from the Holocaust. You know, the Anglos, they played around with the Germans for a while, and they wouldn't even let you. They wouldn't even let you Jewish people. They wouldn't let Jews really escape from Europe, so they could go to the Middle Eastern region and be safer there. This was not desired or chosen by Britain, because Britain was still cultivating its ties to the Arab kingdoms, so they didn't want to offend the Arab kingdoms, so they made a deal with the Arabs against the Jews. So this was the KGB pitch. Don't trust these Anglos. Don't trust these Europeans. They betray you over and over again. But you can trust us, the communists, right? You know, we fought the fascists. We defeated, with much Anglo help, but that's another story. We defeated the fascists. We defeated the Germans. You know, we shredded the German Empire. We punished the Germans for what they've done. So we're your friends. Come to us, and the communist ideology is, better than any other ideology. So a lot of Jews bought into that. Some dabbled in the ideology, some became lifelong followers, some even became traitors, like the Rosenbergs and, Klaus Fuchs and all these guys. But there's like this state, this progression that an individual can go through step by step. Somebody like Epstein, right? So at first, Epstein pops up on the radar of Donald Barr, right? They get along for whatever reasons, creepy or not. They get along. So then maybe Donald Barr, who was once worked for the predecessor of the CIA, maybe Barr.
You're thinking of William Barr.
No, the older one. Which one was the older? Not William, but
Donald Barr, right? The father of William Barr. You're right. Yeah.
The older Barr. So maybe
he ran that prep school in New York.
Yeah. So maybe the old Barr referred Epstein to some of his contacts, which is not official CIA business. You can't blame Langley for something that a former OSS guy did, right? It's not how it works, but. So maybe Barr referred Epstein to some other contacts, and maybe.
Well, what he did, Donald Barr referred Epstein to a famous Wall Street broker, so that Epstein got to work at Bear Stearns.
Yeah.
But then he was caught doing unethical things at Bear Stearns, and they let him go.
Yeah.
Because he was.
And so
doing things which is not a big surprise that a psychopath or a sociopath like Epstein would do unethical things as a broker, right?
Yeah. And
but somehow he managed to remake himself after that.
He turns into a Barry Lyndon. If people actually watch this old Stanley Kubrick film, Barry Lyndon, he's like this nobody who goes out into the world, and he goes from one group to the next, always pledging his allegiance and his loyalty, and he betrays every single group and just tries to become an aristocrat and attain power. But so Epstein could go from place to place, making new friends, new acquaintances. I mean, maybe once the Anglos, or he felt disappointed because the Anglos didn't want to play with him anymore because he wasn't loyal. So maybe he fell out of favor with the Anglos, and then maybe he tried to play with some mafia guys, maybe some Jewish mafia guys. And then things go on from there. And then it's eventually he pops up on the radar of the Russians. And then things change again. right? And they could, once he's recruited by the Russians, once Epstein becomes a Russian asset, they would instruct him not to burn all the previous bridges. They would instruct their asset to keep cultivating certain ties that he had earlier, with the Anglos, maybe become friends with them again, rekindle some old acquaintances, stay entangled with the Jewish contacts, make new friends, Israeli friends. That's what the Russians would instruct him to do. Not burn bridges, but make new ones. And
Well, I should remind people. There's a book that I recommend that is an interesting book, "The Secret War Against the Jews" by Loftus and Aarons. And these guys use sources in retired intelligence people throughout the Cold War, going back to World War II, who talk about how strong the anti-Semitic forces were in the United States, Great Britain, and France, and how there was no real great love for the Jews among the Western powers. Although Charles de Gaulle, to spite Britain, allowed Jews to go on French ships to go, on the Exodus to get into the Middle East, to get into Israel or Palestine at the time. How Secretary James Forrestal, the first U.S. Secretary of Defense, was rabidly anti-Semitic. He was a Wall Street wonder boy, wunderkind, right, who hated the Jews and went behind Truman's back to try to undermine the vote for this division of Palestine so the state of Israel would be created. And in fact, it all hinged on which way the Latin American countries would go in this. And it had been basically arranged that the Latin American countries would vote against Israel. And Israel suddenly realized this. And what they did is they blackmailed Nelson Rockefeller, who then used his financial clout of the Rockefeller family to change the votes of the Latin American countries. And that's the real secret story of how Israel. So there was a struggle between anti-Semites and people who were friendly to Israel within the U.S. government. The idea that the Israelis just control the U.S. government like Hitler thought, it wasn't true. In fact, they had to use blackmail. The Israelis do use blackmail, and the Russians use it. Famously, most secret services don't favor blackmail because it often explodes in your face. So you have to have some very special skills to use. The Russians are very good about blackmail in that they try to turn the blackmail person into a friend, make it about the blackmail. The Israelis may not be so quite as nice about it. I'm not sure how they do it, but like in the American service, they just don't bother with blackmail. A lot of intelligence services don't, because they know it's better to develop a rapport, to develop a trust. When you blackmail somebody, where's the trust with that source?
Yeah.
This one American spy that I forget his name now. He's a CIA guy. He was in charge of counterterrorism in Pakistan, and he went to jail because he openly spilled the beans about America torturing people, CIA torturing. And anyway, he said something very interesting. One of his biggest recruitments in Pakistan, he asked the guy this is an Islamist terrorist. He recruited him to give secrets to the United States government. And he said to him, as the guy was going off with the money and what he did for him, he said, I'm your enemy. Why did you do this? Because you asked about my family. I've been in Pakistan 5 years, and you're the first person to ask about my family. Right. Yeah. So that rapport, it turns out that kindness is more important in recruiting people than blackmail in these most cases. But the Israelis, they use it because they have a ruthlessness, and they have a history, and they have a reputation for that. And the Russians also, they use use every resource, kill them with kindness and blackmail them, but a different kind of blackmail.
Yeah.
So, now, and this is the thing.
To me, something that is truly stands out about this Epstein case, because we people can talk about some of these elements, right? I mean, elements that are very basic and that we have seen in other places, like the blackmail or a reward system. I mean, this is also a thing. You create a sort of special exclusive club, and the members of this club, they have to pay a certain price to be a member. It's just like a subscription model. And as long as you're a member, you have access to illegal fun activity, and you get protected. So you don't have to worry so much about getting caught, and you don't have to organize the whole thing by yourself. I mean, this is like rich people or very powerful people. They're very busy people, so they only have a fixed set of hours to have fun during. And so usually what they do is they have others organize things for them, right? So if there's like if they want to have a wedding, so a powerful person has like his son or daughter gets married, the powerful father or father-in-law, he doesn't plan all the wedding stuff himself. He's not obsessed with these flowers or those flowers, or he gets professionals to plan everything, right? Or to curate your jet airplane, or to acquire cars for you, or to acquire properties. You have people that do these things for you. And so if you create sort of like an illegal subscription-based club for illegal fun, it's an attractive option for powerful people. You don't have to organize it yourself. You get protection, and that's that. But this is kind of like a standard technique. This is nothing out of the ordinary. Or the blackmail thing is nothing out of the ordinary. Or somebody who's just ambitious and wants to feel important. Oh, I have Mossad ties. I work for the Russians, and I occasionally do some things for somebody who works at the CIA. This sense of self-importance. Many people become traitors to repair their ego if this ego has been hurt by rejection, loss of status, and by becoming a traitor, you can repair that ego. But what truly stands out was which I explained earlier, the House of Cards. Very strange in terms of operational security to put so many operational elements into the hands of one guy, and the guy who is so visible when you need somebody who is quiet and elegant and not in your face, or you can use multiple people instead of one. And the other thing that stands out is the sheer scale of Epstein's enterprise. Now, this suggests that there was a powerful network behind him. Because, I mean, Epstein consistently behaved like a full-time contact cultivation machine. A man whose work looked less like conventional finance and more like constant relationship acquisition, maintenance, and monetization across borders and sectors. So the more documents we get, the more we understand the size of this thing. I mean, a typical financier guy must spend most hours on finance operations, compliance, markets, clients, and deals, then socialize inside a relatively stable fun circle. Epstein, by contrast, appears to have invested enormous time into recruiting and managing a sprawling constellation of contacts and logistics across New York, Florida, New Mexico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and across national boundaries, while simultaneously running a sex trafficking operation and a reputation laundering project. So, it's kind of like a silly idea that he just did all of that just for himself or by himself.
Oh, sure. He was working for somebody else.
Like you need a full-time office building full of people who just manage the contacts and who to attach to, who to contact, how to contact this person, how to assess this person, how to introduce.
Oh, yeah, you got to have a lot of support. You got to have a lot of support in terms of guiding you. Yes. So that you don't run into a trap. No doubt. I'm short on time. We could do a part two and continue this next week.
Oh,
It sounds like you've got a
absolutely.
lot more,
Absolutely.
because this
Because
is, I think this is fascinating. I think that what we've got is, um, look, the you got the headline on the Daily Mail saying that this is a Russian honey trap. They're quoting intelligence sources confirming that it is. Um, that's rather serious. And when you look at the emails, you see the references to Russia. Um, you know, thousands of references to Russia, over 1,000 references to Putin, meetings with Putin. One meeting that he had with Putin after he was convicted of being a child, doing child prostitution, and another one scheduled, I think, in 2014. I mean, he's meeting with Putin, and of course, Trump being referred to all over this too. And the real concern, and maybe we'll focus on this next week, is what was Trump's real relationship with Epstein? What can we really credit anymore the idea that Trump was not mired in this? And then the question that people say, well, Trump was a double agent working for the FBI, that we were counter infiltrating the network. That's why it remained up. Well, just a little titilizer for this.
oh yeah.
What is your thought? And we can dwell on this more next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you sent me this thing about the German ancestors of Trump and how they moved back and forth, and how
The
this
Dawson
is
S. Field little essay,
yeah,
yes.
how this is. I mean, I've dealt with this topic before, but there's like this whole sphere of intelligence work that has never been properly reconstructed across borders, even in older times. Sometimes 200 years back, sometimes 150 years back in time, and also the special what stands out about Trump. Why Trump is in some ways an anomaly. In many ways, he is like many others. These business tycoons, the partying, the this and the that. But there's some anomalies about Donald Trump, and there's some significant anti-communist history, and serious anti-communist networks and operations that were done. And so yeah, let's just get into that and cover multiple scenarios, because usually people will focus on their one favorite scenario. There's people that, the left, they just wanted to say it was an old man conspiracy. It was just the patriarchy, right? The whole Epstein case. This was the Netflix documentary, basically. This was this dirty old men, dirty old patriarchy. This is what this case was about. And let's not talk about espionage. Let's not talk about the Russians or the Chinese. Let's just talk about the patriarchy. And other people, they just from the very first moment said or claimed that Trump must be definitively a Russian agent, even though there was other scenarios. And I mean, I covered so much creepy stuff about Trump and his associates, but I also always added that there could be a lot more to the story, that this is far more complicated than people think it is. There's double games, there's triple games, and then there's people that got lost in a triple game and they're just kept around for some reason because it's more convenient than other options. It's a very, very fascinating thing. And these things are supposed to be complicated. Sometimes you have to make things so complicated that a professional enemy empire will not understand it. So this is why we have to be respectful.
This is the wilderness of mirrors that James Angleton talked about.
Well, or the complexity. It's not like giving up and saying it's too complex. It's more like just being respectful of the complexity of the intelligence game, and thinking in multiple scenarios at the same time, and sub scenarios. And I was always surprised over the years that a lot of people would never even mention other scenarios. They would never even considered that there might be something else going on, even though some of these authors, and I've read practically all these books that came out about Trump and the negative books about Trump,
and
there was
we
even
really do have to
professionals,
cover.
even people who worked in at the FBI, worked in professional intelligence. They never even mentioned that there could be other things going on.
Well, there's analysis requires that we go through all the possibilities to see if we can rule anything out or we can affirm anything. And of course, it is very difficult for us to affirm things, absolutely, because there's so much information we don't have yet. But every day we're learning more, aren't we?
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, I want to thank you. I'm Jeff Nyquist. This has been Friends and Enemies. We've been working our way through analyzing the Jeffrey Epstein thing. Was he a Mossad agent? Was he CIA? Was he the Russians? What was going on? How could this have operated for so long without being brought down? Brought down by a journalist, right? Not by an intelligence agency. So very fascinating. We're going to continue with this next week. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Nyquist. My co-host here has been Alex Benesch in Germany. I'm in the U.S. Hope you'll join us next week.